Welcome, everyone. I'm Donna Smith from COL's Center of Life Social Justice Resource Center, and I want to thank you for joining us as we discuss this insightful film, The Price of Freedom. Our panelists today are Geraldine Massey and Josh Fleitman. Geraldine is a community and family support therapist for the Center for Victims, a mother of 5 children who became a community activist 28 years ago after the murder of her youngest and oldest sons, 45 days apart. As CeaseFirePA's Western Pennsylvania manager, Josh Fleitman coordinates strategic campaigns in the region to build power for the gun violence prevention movement. His background is in policy, politics, and communications at the local, state, and federal government levels. He previously served as Deputy Chief of Staff to PA Pennsylvania State Senator Pam Iovino and worked in the offices of U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer and Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. Tim Smith will lead this conversation this evening. Tim Smith is the CEO of Center of Life, a nonprofit in Hazelwood. His roots in Hazelwood run deep, and he's worked and volunteered in the community as a community leader and advocate since the 1980s. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat Q&A. We want to hear your thoughts. And now, Tim, please lead us in the discussion.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It is really, great to be a part of this discussion. I think it's a very worthy discussion that we're having, and we're looking forward to hearing from our panelists. Both Geraldine and Josh bring a wealth of experience and knowledge to this subject matter. And so we want to welcome you both, Geraldine and Josh. And it's a very, very powerful film that we all just watched. It certainly impacted me in more ways than one. And I want to start off, I want to just ask Geraldine, as a mother impacted by gun violence and as a therapist, can you tell us how the family moved forward when these types of tragedies happen? You're on mute.
I'm muted. That's my usual. I start talking and don't know whether my mic is on or not. But that's a really good question because, moving on is the goal after the loss of a child, of a sibling. But when you're impacted by this type of tragedy, it affects everybody. So it slows down the movement forward. There's very slow movement forward, and families have to learn, and they have to get help. They can't do it on their own, or they get stuck in anger and hatred and lack of self-care. So they don't really get to move on unless they do get some kind of guidance from somewhere. They got to get some counseling from somewhere.
And Geraldine, can you tell us, how do you feel a community can help a family when they've experienced this kind of devastating loss? And also on the second part of that question is, how did the community support you when you went through your time?
So it was very, it was, the community was affected. So the community wrapped their arms around us. They loved us because we were just one big happy family. My sons were murdered in Hazelwood. So they just they were their children as well. And that happens in most communities. Murdered child has a community all around them, and that community jumps in and they feed you, they give you whatever it is you think you might need. You water, you have everything you need to sustain you for a while. The only thing they can't do for you is bring your child back, but they stand vigil with you, they support you. In most communities, that's what happens. So Tim, let me ask you. The NRA promotes the idea that more guns will provide more safety. Do you believe that more guns would make your own community safer?
Well, absolutely not. I know that by experience, we know that guns have been, sent into communities, in particular, communities underserved, communities of color, for just generations. And they have wreaked nothing but safety. And so, guns in the hand of a child is a tragedy just waiting to happen. Guns in the hand of a person who's just angry, who's not mature yet. All of these things are dangerous for everybody. I mean, for everybody and anybody. And so I think it's a poor argument that the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, because I think that's just a very weak argument there.
Exactly. I totally agree. So what would your community in America look like today if the NRA did not create a false choice between gun rights and the community safety? Because that's the truth, that it is a false, like they're not, gun laws will not, take away rights. They will make a community safer. So what would your community in America look like today if that had not been created?
I think our community would look like some communities that have been insulated from that kind of injustice of having guns just sent into your community. In many of our communities, underserved communities, we have found that young men could get their hands on a gun by the age of 12 or 14. And as a result, many of them have been in a lockup facility or dead by the same age. And so the difference would be, these would be kids, instead of going to jail or instead of having a gun, number one, they'd be able to get a healthy meal. They'd be able to get a good education. They'd be able to be involved in enrichment programs, being able to go to college, being able to live beyond the age of 26 or 14. It would be totally different. That's why in many communities where they don't have guns floating around everywhere, they're so shocked when they have a situation with a gun. They're just super shocked. They're like, oh, this never happens in our community. But they don't understand. I mean, we've had guns dropped off in our community by the carloads, and it never hits the news. So
Exactly.
There's a huge difference. Absolutely.
Right.
Josh, just wanted to talk a little bit about the legislative impact of these kinds of things. And before we discuss the legislative solutions to the gun violence prevention, we need to first understand why gun reform has been so stalled over the years. The film helps us address that, but it addresses it a little bit. But can you give us an overview from your perspective of the pieces that are in play that have structurally blocked legislation and policy that changed the federal laws or at the federal level?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I think a big one is just the nature of the US Senate itself, which overrepresents rural and small states where the NRA has its highest support. Remember, the 50 Democratic senators currently in the US Senate, collectively, they represent over 41 million more Americans than the 50 Republican senators. And then you add on top of that the filibuster, which requires 60 votes or anything to pass. And you see the gridlock that we have now, which is not representative of where the country actually is on this issue. And so this kind of undemocratic asymmetry has been the reason why so much good and popular policy has died in the US Senate, not just gun safety policy, all kinds of policies. So short of amending the US Constitution to restructure the Senate, which I'm not holding my breath for, what's needed to overcome this blockage is really just broad change in the culture, because this is now a front on the culture wars. Guns have become a part of the culture wars, as the film discussed. And so we need a cultural shift that says, no, we are not willing to accept this price of unfettered access to firearms, this carnage and this bloodshed. We can respect responsible gun ownership. We can remain consistent with the Second Amendment. And we can also still save thousands of lives every year through policy change. We have seen that kind of cultural shift on that magnitude take place before. I always point people, look at the issue of gay marriage. 15 years ago, we could not have imagined where we are today, both legally and culturally as a nation, on the issue of gay marriage. And so I think we can see that kind of similar change on the issue of gun safety. I think we can get there to the point where federal level reform is possible. It's going to be a long road, but this film is a big step in fostering that kind of change in awareness and thinking. But so then from that, the obvious next question is, well, what can we do short of creating long-term cultural change? We can't wait for that while 40,000 Americans, including 1,600 Pennsylvanians, die every single year from gun violence. And so the answer in my mind to that question is that we need to shift the focus away from Congress and instead look to the state and local level for change. The film pointed out at the beginning that state and local firearm safety laws have been a tradition in this country since our founding era. And that's what we at CeaseFirePA are driving toward. We're leading the fight for change in Harrisburg, in courthouses, and in city halls across Pennsylvania. And we're actually winning. The NRA, as the film pointed out, has worked at the state level to succeed in some cases. We are actually adopting a similar strategy. For example, in 2018, we passed Act 79, which disarmed domestic abusers. We know domestic abusers are much more likely to kill somebody when they have access to a firearm. That was the first major piece of gun safety legislation that we passed in Harrisburg in 14 years at the time. Just in this past year, as another example, in the past state budget, we helped secure $30 million in grant funding for gun violence prevention programs. And Republicans actually supported that. Another example, our organized opposition has stopped dangerous gun bills from passing. Just last summer, we managed to stall legislation in the state house, which is controlled by the Republican Party. That legislation would have removed the existing requirement to get a permit if you want to carry a loaded concealed gun in public spaces, places like grocery stores, shopping malls, and movie theaters. So we were able to block that legislation here at the state level. Look at Virginia, the state where I actually grew up in. In the space of just a few years, they have completely transformed, and they've passed 15 gun violence prevention laws, passed bills into law. And so here in Pennsylvania and states across the country, we're in the midst of redistricting right now to recreate the structures, the districts that legislators are running their campaigns in. I think that will benefit us, the gun violence prevention movement. It'll create a legislature that is at least somewhat more reflective of where the public opinion is on this issue. And finally, I'll close on this by saying it's worth noting that ultimately, driving state level change, it does feed into federal level change as well, because it's about building power from the ground up. And like I said, beating the NRA and the gun lobby at their own game. Everyone here listening tonight, you are that power that we have to build. So don't underestimate your ability to get things done. If we all can band together and make our voices heard, I won't lie, we have an uphill battle to face in Harrisburg, but it is a winnable one.
Absolutely. I was thinking as you were talking about how important it is for us, as you all are doing the work through Ceasefire Pennsylvania, that there be a almost like an organic but organized cultural shift in the way we do things. And I think that we have created those cultural shifts in many different areas, whether it be the way people wear their hair or their clothes, and like you mentioned earlier, and there are different things that we have done as we've stood up as a culture and we've said no. We've said no to unjust laws. We've said no to unfair laws. We've said no to politicians who've decided to just do nothing. And I think we have to work on it. One of the things that I think has been really important for us as people living in communities is that we are able to band together and create programs that will help to actually control the use of guns in our communities, we can do that, and we can save lives at the same time. And I've seen that. I know we've seen it in our community. We've seen the time when our communities were dealing with drive-by shootings every single day. And I was burying kids between the age of 14 and 26 almost every, 4 weeks or so. It was terrible. And but as the community continued to rise up, come together, we pulled our community groups together. People like Geraldine stepped out, different ones that have done so many things in the community. We don't see that anymore in our communities. And that says something about how we created, just in our community, we created a cultural shift. We created something that we did not have even 15 years ago or 10 years ago. And you know, the other part of this question I wanted to ask to you, Josh, was, you know, the NRA has attacked gun safety groups as people who fundamentally pose a threat to the safety of the country. What is the message or slogan that gun safety groups use or should start using to help them combat this messaging?
Yeah, that's an easy one for me, actually. I think first off, we have to stop saying gun control. I think that feeds into the gun lobby's narrative that we're out to take something away from people. Instead, use gun violence prevention, gun safety, or gun reform, as you were just saying. You know, language matters. And not only are those more accurate descriptions of what we're trying to do, but they also take control of the narrative in a way that is more inviting to people who are persuadable on this issue. And I can guarantee you there are people who are persuadable on this issue. And second, along those same lines, I always say this, you know, we're not opposed to guns, we're opposed to gun violence. The responsible gun owner, and I should be clear here, you know, the truly responsible gun owner, not someone who merely claims to be but isn't. The responsible gun owner, they're not our opponent, they are our ally, and we need them in this fight with us. We cannot alienate them by attacking what they view as an important tool or part of their tradition. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be clear about what study after study shows is true, and that is having a gun in your home puts you at a higher risk of firearm death. Full stop, that's just a fact. But, you know, like I said, we can still respect responsible gun ownership while also still reducing gun deaths and injuries.
I agree with that, Josh. I definitely think that you know, just doing some different stuff with prevention and education. But I also want to add, we have to add to that for our community, conflict resolution, because honestly, you know, the guns are so readily available, but also they're not even thinking like, how can I talk about this? How can I work this out? With the first thing to go through is to pull out a gun and shoot somebody. How final is that? And so we have to start with our young people, teaching them resolution skills. They have to learn how to talk and mediate. Like, I think that the zero tolerance just created anxiety and trauma in kids, because, well, he hit me and I hit him back because that's my response. But now I'm in trouble, he's in trouble. Like, that's not, you didn't work that out. You blamed the victim and you put them on the same level. So I think they thought it was working and it was good, but then the victim started saying, well, I don't like that if I'm gonna get in trouble, I'm gonna get in trouble because I'm gonna hit him first when he's bullying me, you know. So, you know, it gives a whole nother layer to it, is the conflict resolution, which is, I want to always tack that on to gun education, decent, responsible gun ownership. All of that, it will make a difference. It will do the cultural shift, as you said, along with us teaching our communities that conflict resolution skills are essential in this day and age.
Absolutely, Geraldine. You know, when I think about some of the reporting that goes on around gun violence just in our city alone, I think about how we need to put all of this in context. in communities that have been underserved, generationally, in particular communities of color, we have never had a problem getting guns. There's always been guns in our communities. And I can recall, when we were living at the church, one Saturday morning, I got up and I went outside. I had a cup of coffee. I went outside and there was a cream colored, I'll never forget this. There was a cream colored Jeep Cherokee that was filled with US Army artillery, weaponry and artillery. And the windows were down and the vehicle was just sitting. It was about 100 yards from where I lived. And a couple of our other neighbors, Miss Marva, who's no longer with us, but she walked out, different ones walked out, and we all were just speechless. Like we were standing there thinking, what the heck is this? How does this get in our community? And so we called the authorities. A truck came, picked up the vehicle, took the vehicle out. We made a police report. We, called the media, and we heard nothing else about it, nothing else at all. And that's one day that I will never forget that day, because when we were living at the church, we were raising two young Black boys who, I was just thinking, if they can get a gun this easily, if they could just walk out of their house and just see a vehicle that has guns in it, what's happening to everybody else? And so I think that, when we look at these kinds of things and people want to blame, they want to blame gangs, they want to call them gangs. And it's like, wait a minute, what do we mean by gangs? And what do gangs really have to do with guns? And who are the real gang members? What do they look like? Do they have on suits and ties? Or are they busting a sag and wearing, whatever, I mean, people got to really change their focus and change their eyesight so that they can understand what's really happening, because the real power is not walking necessarily around our communities, but it has a lot of impact on our community. And that's how you get something like what we experienced in our community. That's how you get something like that in there, because, we had nothing to do with it. And, so it's really, it's really one of those things. And we as citizens, we have a responsibility to hold our legislators accountable. Sometimes we feel powerless, and yet there is so much that we can do. And I wanted to check in with Josh. How can individuals and non-legislative groups create change in the gun violence prevention movement?
Yeah, like I said, citizens have a lot more power than you may think. If enough of us make our voices heard and expose the gun lobby for the extremist minority that they are, they represent a very small minority of gun owners, we can see that change happen. First and foremost is voting for gun sense candidates. I hope everyone on this call is registered to vote, and that you encourage all your like-minded family and friends to vote too. And that's not just voting in the presidential race, that's voting in state and local races too. Like I said, the state level is really where I think change is going to be happening over the next decade. So voting is simply a must. Otherwise, we can't win. It's as simple as that. Second, you can sign a petition. CeaseFirePA, we have identified 3 particular policies that would address the full range of gun violence, from community-based violence, like you're talking about, Tim and Geraldine in Hazelwood, to mass shootings, like what we saw here in Pittsburgh at the synagogue shooting in 2018, to domestic violence, to firearm suicides, which actually account for close to 2/3 of gun deaths, suicides. We call this our common agenda to end gun violence. The first of those is extreme risk protection orders. Those help prevent suicides and mass shootings. They would allow a family or a law enforcement officer to petition a judge to go through a civil court proceeding to temporarily restrict someone's access to firearms when they're an imminent threat to themselves or others. Second, universal background checks to prevent weapons of war from getting into the wrong hands. In Pennsylvania, you need a background check to buy a long gun, something like an AR-15, from a licensed dealer, but you do not need a background check to buy that very same gun from a private seller. So that's a really deadly gap that we need to close in our law. It allows someone with a violent felony conviction, someone who has been involuntarily committed to a mental health facility, it allows them to buy an assault weapon, which, as we know, is the most often kind of weapon used in mass shootings. And third is legislation that would require the reporting of lost and stolen firearms. This is a way to reduce the flow of illegal guns that fuel so much of the gun violence at the community level, often in inner cities. There's currently no legal requirement for gun owners in Pennsylvania to report when their gun goes missing. And yet we know that those exact guns are popular among people who want to commit crimes because the guns can't be traced back to them. Studies show that those laws, they do reduce the number of illegal guns in the community, which is directly linked to lower homicide rates. So that's all to say, you can sign a petition to support this common agenda. I'm going to put that in the chat right now, and I hope you all will take a quick second after the event to sign it here.
Yeah, I also like to mention, that, this gun issue in our country is also systemic. Of course, it's a systemic issue, and it does not, it does not exist all by itself, and it is a part of what we are trying to work on in our communities through the Social Justice Resource Center, of which Donna Smith is the director of. And the 4 areas that we've focused in on have been, substandard education, bad policing, the courts, and the prison systems, through which, all of which capitalism runs through all 4 of these systems. And you can be sure that there are issues that impact all of those systems overlap with the gun issues that we're dealing with right now. And so it's important that we look at these things sometimes in a larger context, as well as we are writing letters to our legislators, to our officials, as we remain active. I mean, we have to remain active on several different levels. As Josh was saying, we have to write these letters. We have to continue to bombard our politicians. And we also have to have our local activities so that we can encourage our neighbors and the community at large that there is something that we can do if we work together. And we can also protect and educate our children so that they will understand how important it is to be able to live without fear. And but also they can understand that living is a right. Guns, there may be, the Second Amendment does exist, but not at the price of your life, not at the price of your life. And so, and it could be that at some point we need to begin to have a conversation around some changes within our Constitution, within, our some of the amendments that have been made to make sure that the life of a person is valued, because I think that has been a really sort of left out subject that we're talking about, and really sidelined here while we're talking about guns. We're talking about lives that have been taken. And Geraldine, if you would just talk just a little bit more about your experience, because I think people need to hear just a little more about it. Most people don't. There are a lot of people who don't know people who have been directly impacted, but yours is unique because the thing that happened in your family happened like almost within a month of each other. And I wanted you just to share a little bit more of that.
So it was, like you said, very unique in that my sons weren't in gangs. They belonged to the neighborhood and they hung out with the neighborhood boys, but they weren't gangs. And contrary, these were the little boys that hung out at my house. They played basketball at Lewis Field. They weren't in gangs. I mean, they fought up top, down, bottom, but not no gang. And so my son Omar, my youngest son Gerald, went to a party in here in Hazelwood, and someone shot him. And fear for speaking out and fear of them being the next one caused them no one to speak up. So Gerald's murder has never been solved at all. It's just the word that's in the street. But with Omar, they did catch somebody, and it was interrelated. Like there were people that we knew, and it was over an argument that happened when he was 16, and it was they got into a disagreement. So that's why I'm on the bandwagon for conflict resolution, because a lot of people excuse that off like, oh, it was drugs related, or that was no, people are dying because of conflict, a lack of conflict resolution skills, the fact that they're not being taught how to talk about it. And some of them were too scared to talk about it because the guns are there. Like everybody has a gun. Like, that's not, everybody don't have an Apple. Everybody don't have, aren't able to go to the grocery store, but everybody has guns, and how they got them, it befuddles me. So, people think when they see people getting, young ones being murdered, that there's drug or gang activity. That's not, more times than not, it's not the case. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, it does, but but no right does anybody have to take another person's life, no matter what the circumstances are. So without a gun, those guns are, people kill people, it's true, but the guns facilitate them. They're the tools that they use to kill. And if they got it from illegally purchasing them, if they got them from, somebody dropping them off in the neighborhood, that's ludicrous. Like, let's get rid of that. Let's see how much it goes down. Like, just when I watched the film, and the fact that when the ban, the AK ban was lifted, it went sky high. I have a nephew that was, I think it was mistaken identity. He didn't even live here anymore. He had moved to South Carolina, and he was home visiting us. He was waiting at the bus stop, and they literally, with an AK-47, almost cut him in half. And why? What kind of? They won't even shoot an elephant with that gun. So I get on. I am one to say, let's vote. I call my children, vote. Did you vote? Because if we don't vote, then we don't have no words. We don't have no mouth. We don't have no voice. So we have to vote, and we have to get behind this kind of legislation if we're going to make a difference. And I'm with Josh. Start at the state level. Start in the city, and then go to the state. But let's start locally. The change has to come, and we have to, do it now. Now is the time. Vote. That's right, Bailey. Vote.
Absolutely. 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 Thank you for sharing that, Geraldine. The movie was to me, the movie was particularly powerful because it showed both sides of the conversation. It showed the real people who are both taking action to do something about it, and who are trying to keep things the same and don't want to change. And I think that that's really, for me, that's what made the movie significant, and just listening to that. But I think it was actually on the side of the NRA that said that, hey, our people vote. And so, if the folks who are members of the NRA vote, we know that we have to vote as well. Exactly. And I think that's wise counsel for everybody. We want to open up, want to take time and open this up for discussion for anybody in the audience and we want to reach out to Danielle to share with us any questions that have come through.
All right, so we have a few questions that came through. The first one is, changing gun laws is not enough. Somehow we have to change the culture surrounding guns. Guns have become a tribal symbol. How do we change this gun culture? Is the culture surrounding guns different in the Black and white communities? So then will different approaches be needed?
That's a great question. Go ahead, Josh. I think I see you getting ready to.
Yeah, the response I would have is, I absolutely agree. As I talked about, cultural change needs to happen. I think as it relates to the white community, especially the more rural community, where this kind of passion on the other side is so strong, I hate to say it, but I think as the suicide epidemic continues to rage across rural America, that is going to be part of the cultural change we see. just to go back to my example of the issue of gay marriage, I think a lot of more conservative rural Americans, the more they had their brother, their sister, their children come out of the closet and say, and put a human face on the issue, like, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, I'm bisexual, that slowly chipped away at the culture. Similarly, in a more morbid way, I think as more people are lost to suicide, I mentioned close to 2/3 of gun deaths in Pennsylvania are suicides. As more families feel that horrific pain and loss, I think we're going to start to see more support for things like extreme risk protection orders that can prevent someone who's suicidal from harming themselves. We're going to see more people become aware that, chip away at this myth and this facade that was talked about in the film about how guns are, a symbol of freedom. They're also a killing machine. And so as more families feel that pain, especially white families who, as Tim pointed out, for a long time have been insulated from the high levels of community violence that the Black community feels, I think that's going to be part of the change that we see as the culture, starts to shift.
And the other thing, and I think this fits with what you're saying, Josh, is that we need truth to be revealed throughout our country. One of the subject matters that has been very controversial in our country lately has been critical race theory. And what most people don't realize is that critical race theory is not a danger to teach in school. It's a danger to not understand that we're living it out. And when we actually go back and look at the birth of our nation, the birth of this country, what we see is, even though we see guns in a different way in terms of the, relative to the NRA back then, but just the way this country was built, and the people who lost their lives behind guns, and the land that was taken, and so many things, the people who were marginalized, and on and on and on. We have to discuss those truths as well, because it's not like we just started shooting. We didn't just start shooting. People were getting shot, people were getting killed years, hundreds, years ago. And it says something about us as human beings, and it says something about what we fear about other people, what we fear about what we can't have, or what we're trying to get. There's a lot of different messages that are there, but that have to be discussed, that have to be talked about. The truth about all of these things have to come out. And I think that we need our politicians to engage in that. We need our communities to engage in it. We need our churches, our ministers, and all the different ones to engage in that, because until we begin to speak truth and talk about it, and people won't have a good understanding of why some of these things are happening. It's not just because people are angry. It's not just because we get access to guns. It's not just because those things. It's because we have a history in this country, of violence. And so we have to address that. We can't let that slide under the rug. We have to address the violence that people have experienced down through the years. And did we have any other questions there, Danielle?
Yeah, so the next question was actually asked twice. What can we do to cut off the guns that are being dropped off by the carload? And who do we hold accountable for those types of things?
Well, let me just speak to that real quick. I know we experienced that once. At least I experienced it once when we were living at the church. And I don't know if any other community members have ever experienced anything like that. I know it's happened more than once in our community. But I think that at the time, we really didn't know what to do. We assumed that we were doing the right thing by calling the police, by making a police report, and then also by alerting the media so that it would be reported that this kind of thing had happened. But we heard nothing else after that. And that was years ago, you all. Probably, I'm going to say it was probably back in 90 or 91 when that happened. And I think now we have measures that we can take to just, really make sure it doesn't happen. But it really is going to require community engagement. People have to be willing to get involved and not kind of do what we did. You know, we followed the rules, so to speak, but nothing happened. But I think in some ways we almost have to say, you know, no, you're not taking this car out of the community until we know, you know, that you're going to do the right thing, until we know you're going to press this battle all the way to the gate, and that you're going to tell us where this came from, that you're going to run these plates, that you're going to, you know, you're going to investigate this vehicle. We know we have to push a lot harder. We didn't push that hard back then because we were just in shock, you know, but today, I'm sure there are many other things that we can do. And Geraldine or Josh, if you want to speak to that, please do.
I think that as far as, for me, as far as getting the guns out, it's like almost like, I don't know how we can do that because they're in there and they're in there so deep. So we can't do it without, like, you know, violating their rights, like just rushing in and, you know, raiding all the time. And they did do that, you know, back in the day. That's how they brought down some of the crime people, is that they got information. But there are, and I don't have the numbers, but there are two, a county and a city tip line where you can, you know, report crime. Like we got to start reporting what we see. So if somebody sees that car full of guns, you got to report that car full of guns. If you see, you know, drug deals going on a certain corner, you can anonymously do that. You can report and tell them that, and do it enough that somebody's going to come and watch while you watch. There's no way that I should be able to watch a drug deal and they can't catch them because they're doing it right in the open. So if you want to help get the community back in some kind of order, the guns out, you got to report it when you see it. If you see it, you know, it's that's the only way that's going to stop it. You got to report the crime.
Yeah, those are both great suggestions from Tim and Geraldine in terms of what the community can do. From a policy perspective, there's a lot we can do on this particular question. One, like I mentioned, is a law that would require the reporting of lost and stolen guns, because, like I said, these lost and stolen guns are the ones that fuel so much of the illegal guns that come into the community and that are used for these kinds of crimes. And again, we see from other states that have this law, they have less illegal guns in the community, less homicides, less violent crimes. Two is actually a pretty simple one, but it's not discussed that often, and that is cracking down on legal gun dealers who are flagrantly violating the law. There's a U.S. government agency, the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the ATF, that is legally charged with issuing licenses to gun dealers and enforcing the law that they have to follow. They have to run background checks. They can't sell guns to minors, that kind of stuff. There's an investigation recently that showed that there's hundreds of gun stores across the country responsible for the vast majority of a lot of the illegal guns that were once legal and then become illegal. So holding those folks accountable, investing in a U.S. government agency, ATF, that has the resources and the authority necessary to do that kind of enforcement. Sadly, we saw, you heard in the film, you hear all the time, the pro-gun people, they say, we don't need new gun laws, we just need to enforce existing laws. Well, they have intentionally hobbled the ATF. They have stripped it of resources. They have prevented it from accessing the funding that they need, the legal authority they need. And just recently, they torpedoed the confirmation of the director of the ATF, a gentleman named David Chipman, who is a gun owner, was an ATF agent for 25 years. His nomination failed in large part due to the gun lobby. And so, let's enforce the existing laws. Let's invest in an agency that can enforce those laws and hold rogue gun dealers accountable. And finally, I'll close on this one, ghost guns. We've heard a lot about this. These are essentially do it at home, you make it yourself at home firearms. You can buy a kit from a gun show without any kind of background check. And with pretty simple tools, you can go home and assemble this ghost gun kit into a fully functioning firearm that can kill someone or hurt someone just the same as a regular firearm. The problem is they're not regulated at all. You don't need a background check. There's no serial number on the guns. The police can't trace it and track it. There is fortunately a federal rule under President Biden that's under development right now that would regulate ghost guns the same as regular guns. But we've seen, especially in Philadelphia and increasingly here in Pittsburgh, we've seen ghost guns more often found at crime scenes. So that's one positive step that's being taken to try and reduce the guns that are being used in crimes.
You know, we've heard a lot of people say that, you know, guns are not the problem, that people are the problem. But, you know, we would never give our 6-year-old the keys to the car and say, go down the road and get and go shopping and bring back all the groceries. We would never do that, because we know that if a 6-year-old got behind the wheel of our car, somebody would get killed, possibly the 6-year-old. And so when we put guns in the hands of just anybody, I don't care if you're 6 or 60, a gun is something you have to be responsible for, and you have to have you have to be in the right state of mind. You can't be a people hater. You know, I mean, there's so many different things that need to be in play if you're going to have a weapon that can take the life of another human being. And I just think that, you know, this subject matter is so important, because it's not an either or thing. It's a both and thing. We have to control guns because we have people that are out of control. And so we have to handle that, you know, and we have to handle both of those things at the same time. And so, and it's only by doing that we're going to see a drop in these kinds of crimes. We have to handle both things at the same time. This has been an amazing discussion, and particularly because of the participation of Geraldine and Josh. The work that you both are doing is phenomenal. You've impacted so many people, and it has been an honor to be able to partner with you all for this particular session to talk about this whole gun issue. And we want to just thank you for really sharing with us. And if you have any closing remarks, please share them with us at this point.
Sure. I guess, you know, I would close with this. I hope the movie made you angry and sad. It certainly did with me. But I hope that this conversation made you feel empowered, because if I have one message for you, it's that your voice can make a difference. There's, you know, the other side has managed to pass dangerous policies by their folks getting involved. We need you to get involved too. Not just sign the petition that I sent, but call your lawmaker, schedule a meeting with them, attend CeaseFirePA's Advocacy Day, where we will help arrange a meeting with your lawmaker for you. We have that every year in March. Write a letter to the editor, hold your own event. But even most importantly, have conversations with your friends and family, because, you know, that's how we change a culture, is one person, one conversation at a time. Somebody who you know owns a gun, you know, engage them in a conversation, respect their perspective, but, you know, ask them questions. Do you store your gun safely? If you were suicidal, would you want there to be a mechanism to temporarily put some time and space between you and your gun? Have those conversations. Feel like the agency is in your hands, because it really is. I know that our democracy right now is in a state of peril, but, you know, we are still a democracy. People have the power, so you have the power. So I hope you'll join us in this movement.
Thank you, Josh.
I just want to say it was an honor to be able to have a voice in this type of an event, to be able to speak from a victim's point of view to what this really feels like when your child is murdered. Like, it's not just something that, you know, it's a fleeting thing, it's a life sentence. So I appreciate the fact that I get to 28 years later still be able to talk about my my 2 sons' murder, because I live with it daily, and I'll, you know, in the same for other mothers who have lost their children. So thank you for asking me to be a part of this. And it's such important work. And I can't say it enough, vote. get involved, do what Josh says, get involved. It makes a difference. And really, it makes more difference than you know if you talk to your legislator. They know if you vote.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. And, you know, I would just say, work together. We have to work together. I noticed in the chat, somebody mentioned about the news media that reported about the gangs in Hazelwood. But I can tell you, as being somebody who's been in Hazelwood for a long time, there is no such thing as a Hazelwood mob. And so, you know, it's all about us working together. If we could work, if the media would work with us, if we can work with our local police officers, we can work with our communities, we can work with our politicians. If we do this together, it'll be too much. It'll be too much for the negative forces to be able to handle, and they'll have to take their business somewhere else, or they'll actually go out of business. If we come together, they will go out of business. And I think that's really what needs to happen. And so we want to give thanks today to all of the people who helped to contribute to this really phenomenal discussion and to the great documentary that was put together. Squirrel Hill Stands Against Gun Violence, CeaseFirePA, Picture Motion, Center of Life, and the Social Justice Resource Center, and of course, our own Geraldine Massey and the work that she's been doing through the Center for Victims. We want to thank all of you for being a part. And also we want to make sure that community members know that the next steps for us is to be a part of contributing a remembrance object here in Pittsburgh. So there will be a group that is going to be coming to pick up things that you want to present and drop off as remembrance objects that are going to be displayed in Washington, D.C. And the places you can drop them off on Sunday between the hours of 12 and 5 o'clock are the Grayson Community Center and Center of Life. And the information is on your screen right now. If you want any other information, please feel free to reach out to Center of Life or any of these other organizations that we mentioned. Squirrel Hill Stands Against Gun Violence, CeaseFirePA, Picture Motion, Center of Life. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll look forward to coming back again and having some more of these discussions.